we're live here. That's it. Yes. Just let everybody know, let them know
You're
we're
right, but we can bring it up.
Okay, we're live.
Yes.
Are you gonna bring it up or you want me to? I think it'd be more appropriate if you did.
I'm gonna go check my, check the stream feed, make sure it's streaming. YouTube, City of Aztec. Live. Okay.
We're ready.
It's streaming.
Yes, we're just waiting for Kathy to.
How do you tell?
Okay, I see her mic, I just don't see her. There we go.
I'm here.
There you go. All right, very good. And I'm scrolling up to, I've got the stuff you sent on my phone, but I can't see it quite as well. I just pulled my iPad up. Okay. I guess we can go ahead and get started, folks. Again, thank you for taking the time and adjusting the schedule because of Tuesday and all that, and being flexible. So we'll go ahead and kick off our step number 2. It's Thursday, May 21st, 19 p.m. So I'm going to pass it over to the city manager, and I think he's going to pass it right over to you, Captain.
Yes, sir, pretty much. And just, does everybody have the material that Kathy just sent out, pulled up on their web devices? So, yes, sir, with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm gonna forward it right to Kathy.
Okay, good evening. I apologize for the lateness of this material to you. The numbers have continued to be revised as new information has come in. So what you have before you is obviously that the complete document. My plan is after this evening's discussion, if there is specific items that commission wants added, deducted, that type of thing, then I can incorporate those changes into the regular full book and get that out to you all tomorrow. So with that said, I think from last week meeting, workshop, we all know that the revenues have just had are going to dramatically decrease. Fortunately, with the May gross receipts distribution, we didn't experience any drastic drop with that one, but we do expect the June, July, probably August and September to have significant reductions. And as a result, that has made it, we've had to make some adjustments in general fund, in special revenue funds, capital projects funds, and as well as over in the joint utility funds. So one of the first documents that I sent you is the draft staff summary that is included in the agenda next week, which basically identifies what has not been included or the changes that we've had to make to the budget this year due to those reductions in revenues. As I mentioned at the last workshop, we're working with a 30% reduction in gross receipts tax, which is a little bit over $1 million. It's actually $1 million to general fund, but we also have gross receipts that goes into the road fund, to capital projects, and over to joint utility. So a 40% reduction in motor vehicle revenues. This one is a difficult one to project at this point in time because we don't know how quickly we're going to be able to, at what point we'll be able to be back to normal with motor vehicle. So at this time, I'm using 40%, which is not quite half a year to get back to normal. But that's when we're going to have to watch. Interest earnings, a reduction is in those as well. That's a combination of the changes in the interest rate, as well as a projection in our cash reserves decreasing, which of course is going to lower the interest. We didn't see it with the May distribution, but we are anticipating a potential reduction in the gas tax revenues. That's another one I don't have a feel for. How much were we not traveling during April, May, and what kind of impact that might have to those gas tax revenues. Those revenues go directly into the road fund, which is what we used to have been saving for the arterial, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. 12% reduction in court fines, again, because the courts have not been operating as normal, as well as law enforcement activity has changed a little bit over the last few weeks. Corrections, again, that's through courts. 40% reduction in lodger's tax. We think that that's sufficient based on the lodger's tax meeting that we had this past Monday, but that's another one we're going to have to watch because we don't know how quickly that industry will come back. Electric, water, and wastewater revenues are projecting a decrease in those revenues as well. Electric is due to the schools as well as businesses not operating in their normal fashion. Water, again, due to the change in commercial activity, and because for commercial water is based, or wastewater is based on their water usage. That's why we have a reduction on the wastewater side. So all of those revenue reductions are hitting all of the funds, which means we really had to look at virtually every line item to determine where we needed to make cuts, what was unreasonable. And with the information I've provided you so far, I'm more comfortable with the joint utility right now than I am with the general fund because that's a very slim cash reserve to be working with at this point. We're ending, the projection is at 668,000 to end at FY21. The state isn't going to enforce that reserve right now, but that's still 668,000 is not a place where we want to start next year at. So, and if our gross receipts drops any lower than what we're projecting right now, we'll have to, obviously we'll have to do something. And so we'll have to continually, whatever budget we adopt, we'll have to be monitoring it on a monthly basis. And we do that anyway, but we'll be looking at it in a different way so that we're not waiting until January to make any adjustments if we need to. So with that cheerful news, things that aren't included. So personnel is obviously in both our general fund and our joint utility are, well, primarily on the general fund side because that's where the bulk of our employees are at. Personnel is where we have to take a hard look at what we're doing. On the joint utilities side, we don't have as many employees, but whatever we do on the general fund side, of course, is going to ripple over to the joint utility employees as well. So right off, there are no pay increases included in the budget in any of the estimates that you have before you. Health insurance benefits are increasing by 3%. That's both on the employee and the employer side. We got great news yesterday. New Mexico Self-Insures, who we have our insurance through, is allowing a one-time premium discount of 50% on workers' comp premiums and on our general liability premium. And for general fund by itself, that was $100,000 that I was able to take out of the expenses, which is really nice because I would have had a much lower number to be working with. They're all the vacant positions that were budgeted in FY20, but that were vacant as of April 1st are in the FY21 budget, but they're not budgeted to be filled until after January 1st. There's no new positions added into the budget. We have included retirements that finance is aware of having a potential to occur. There's 3 of those in general fund for approximately $100,000 and 1 in joint utility for $30,000. The positions that are currently furloughed or on layoff that have occurred in the last couple of 3 weeks are included in the FY21 numbers beginning July 1st. Now, that's not to say that they'll come back July 1st. That will all depend on how we're allowed to reopen, what those department requirements are. So that'll be something that Steve will be working with those departments to determine what those staffing level requirements are and when to bring them on. But rather than trying to predict when that might be, we have just budgeted all of those positions starting July 1st. Does that make sense? Okay.
I've got a question real fast.
Sure.
So, and if we need to talk about it later, that's fine. I was just gonna check. So with the no pay increase, have we heard anything as far as the state still raising the minimum wage? I know we were kind of trying to get there with the pay increases. I didn't know, I know this is gonna affect our process that we had discussed to get to that point.
Right. Currently, no, I have not heard that the state's going to make any changes to those increments on the minimum wage. What we were trying to do was get our entire pay plan lifted. We don't have any employees right now that we would be in danger of not meeting those minimum wage requirements. It was just more to get that whole pay plan lifted. So we're going to, I don't know when we'll be able to implement that. Hopefully July of 21, we can start that implementation, get back on course with that. I don't see that happening before. I don't see that being something that could be considered in January. But I wish I could say it otherwise, but I don't think that that's even something we could even think about doing. But like I said, our lowest paid employees will be above the minimum wage. It's still not where we want our employees to be at, but we'll still be legal as what we're paying our employees.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Part-time, let's see, temporary positions that were in the budget. We have those for several departments, primarily for seasonal purposes. We have them in the parks. We have them for street sweeping. All of those, and those could either be employees that we hire, or we could go through a staffing agency. All of those have been cut in half. So basically pushing those out probably until the first of the year as well. Again, that'll be something that will be coordinated with the city manager and the departments as to what their needs are, but we did also reduce those budgets for those temporary positions. So the flip side with the furloughs and the layoffs, with employees being eligible to collect unemployment, that will also have a direct impact to the city. So even though we anticipate employees coming back, sometime in probably the next quarter. I went ahead and have budgeted those unemployment costs for the maximum period that employees could currently go on unemployment. So again, hopefully I have over budgeted on that side and we'll see a little bit of relief, but I wanted to do the worst case scenario with that budget. The YCC program has been eliminated from the budgets completely. So that includes the materials and supplies that the city would have purchased, which was in general fund. That's approximately $25,000 annually, as well as then the youth coordinator, which is an employee on our side of approximately $8,000, and then of course all of the youth side of it that would have been funded through the grant. If the city decides to make an application for that program this fall for the 21 summer program, we would have to make sure that we have appropriate funds for the June portion of that, because at this point, there is absolutely nothing in the budget for the YCC program. And then we looked at everything else: travel, training, fuel, supplies. There's been numerous cuts. Training we reduced for a lot of the departments by approximately 50%, but that percentage varies depending on the department. We have some departments that have training that they have to do to maintain certifications. And if they can't get that virtually, if the training becomes available, if it opens up in the spring, they're going to have to be able to travel to that just to maintain certifications and such. So again, it varies from department to department, but we did look at all of the travel. Training, we didn't make many reductions there, because what we're finding is that a lot of the annual conferences and such that aren't being able to be held, they're doing virtual conferences. And so there's still an ability for employees to attend, but there is a cost associated. So we didn't want to touch those training budgets, because we want that staff development and for certifications and that type of thing to be able to continue. Capital, for the most part, all of the capital in the budgets were cut. There is capital still within the joint utility fund, and there's pieces of capital, but within general fund, we don't have hardly any capital at all. It's all been delayed. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to purchase police cars. I'm not going to be able to purchase equipment for the parks department. For all of the departments that have those needs, that's going to be another one that's going to have to be delayed, probably at least another year. So with that said, do you have questions, or we want to go into the cash estimates, or?
I do have something, Kathy, that I had asked about, and it goes into capital projects. And I had talked to Steve about it before. We have one of our city parks in the whole city that's utilized on a daily basis that doesn't have a small pavilion and a table. And it's utilized every day, and I had asked that we take a look at maybe doing that. I think the numbers that I was given was, and I've kind of done some checking on it, I think it was a little high. I think we can do it. We don't need to do Taj Mahal. The one that's over here by motor vehicle department that doesn't have a barbecue pit, doesn't have all that concrete, I think it'd be a whole lot cheaper, and I think it would be more important than bleachers in Riverside and that kind of stuff, because all of our city parks are utilized. They're beautiful. Our parks department is doing a wonderful job, but that is one of our newest parks that's utilized a lot. We have nothing for people to sit. You know, I would like to see that in the capital projects.
Okay.
And not because I live there, I think it's all of our parks, and I think, Austin, mentioned this back a long time ago. Our parks are one of our most important things we have. And, that would be a great, addition to that park. If we can do it, like I said, don't build Taj Mahal, build a small pavilion, and put a picnic table, call it good. You know, I think it would help a lot of people up there.
Yeah, and what, and I can't confirm, but I had asked Jeff to put that in the capital improvement plan. Obviously I missed it, not being on the park improvement side, but, you know, to that point, we can certainly look at it, but, the way things are situated now, we'll, put that in the queue for a year or two. If we can do it this year, possibility. But as far as most of those shelters and the pads, I'd given you an estimate between 15 and 20, and we have just tried to remain consistent across the board with our look, if you will, in all the parks. So that'll be, that'll be another factor as well. But yeah, we'll certainly get that added on or into the queue, if you will.
Yeah, I'd like to see it in there sometime. Didn't have to be this year. You know, I know where we are this year, but somewhere down the road, I'd like all of our parks to be, you know, just like you said, all the same and utilized, like they're being taken care of, so.
Maybe I missed it. Which park?
The park up in Cocopelli subdivision. You know,
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah. And it's not because I live there, because I don't go that park. It's just, I see that park every day and I know what's going on up there, so.
And just for reference to everybody, that had been our original intent when we developed that park and built it. It just got short of funds, and it was not something at the time that we decided to put the money elsewhere into a little bit bigger playground, I think it was. So definitely noted.
I'm not personally familiar with that park, and I think that anytime that we can beautify a public space or an open space, I think that's something we should try and do. But obviously under the circumstances we find ourselves in, we also, and I know I'm not telling anybody anything they don't already know, the optics of some of these things are extremely important. We have to be aware of, you know, the fact that we are not filling positions, their livelihoods lately, at least temporarily, hopefully just temporarily. You know, and I know, Kathy, that you're looking at those things and considering those when you put them in or take them out of the budget as to, you know, what would that look like if, you know, we put a new, and I know to Commissioner Padilla's point, he's not suggesting we go out to bid on it tomorrow. And it's just one of those things he's kind of dropping in the bucket, it'll come out at some point, hopefully. But I'm sure you're already aware of that, but just, you know, for all of us, myself included, it's one of those things we have to really be thinking about. You know, there's folks out there that are out of work, and, you know, something is kind of an additional, you know.
Jump in there right now. I want it where people understand that we keep all our parks the same. I know where we are financially, and I agree with you 100%. I'd rather have people working than have a pavilion at that park. But
yeah, I'm sure, I know you do. But you know, it's just maybe just an anecdotal thing. Sorry, I'll be quiet. Let you move on, Kathy.
okay, we're good.
Well, and I think that's part of the problem is that, and I think all of you are aware, is that we have different pots of money in the city. And so, but they can't all be used for the same types of things. And so when we start talking over like in the special revenue funds or over in the capital projects funds, those are not funds where those public monies are used for personnel costs. And that's not something that the commission has the ability to appropriate those balances to be transferred over to general fund for the use of personnel. And so one of the things when I was looking at it was where is that balance in trying to continue to be trying to make some progress in the city and not just stagnate. We had talked about it this morning. Where's the balance between trying to balance a budget or have a budget that we can live with and still maintain buildings and facilities but still try to take care of ways, and it's a difficult balance trying to find where that is. And I'm not saying what I'm presenting is that balance. That's why we're having these workshops, so that everybody can weigh in as to what they would like to see in this budget or not see in it.
If I may too, just jump in there briefly, that when we talk about the personnel cuts or not hiring positions till January, temporary employees not being brought on board due to the budget impact, that affects the look across the city. We'll take parks, for example, that because Jeff doesn't have the full complement of crew right now, the mowing schedule is being adjusted. So we might not be able to weed eat all the time due to staff. The mowing schedule might have to be altered from twice a week to once a week. And that's just one example. Each department has those effects to it based on their staffing levels, that the level of service might not be to where we are accustomed to. And that's going to show, it affects us personally as well as the appearance to the public. It's not where we want it to be, but due to budget impacts, we're making the adjustments as needed.
One of the things I always think about is our participation with organizations like San Juan State Communities Initiative or ForSed, and if we pull out, then we're not a team player. And how does the city look if we don't participate? But my priority is that we have to take care of Aztec, or we have to take care of the people who work in the city. So it's always kind of difficult to say, let's cut everybody off because we can't afford it. But anyway, just I know it's a few thousand here and a few thousand there, and it's hard. It's hard to keep paying for our seat at the table when we've got these kind of financial issues. So I appreciate other people's thoughts on that.
Hey, Kathy, now when it comes to things like, and I know it varies a little bit, like with ForSed, that's a budget item, right?
Correct.
Like the museum, that's a discretionary fund of the commission.
Yes.
And I know that for the discretionary stuff, we don't have to make that determination. We don't have to come to a conclusion as to, okay, we are or are not going to give X number of dollars to this organization this year. But I do think, in my opinion, that, and I'm sure you have already done at least a cursory glance at some of that stuff, but the things that we are budgeting, for example, and I'm just using ForSed as an example. I had a meeting yesterday that's kind of in the front of my mind, but I'm sure there's a handful of others out there, organizations similar to that, maybe not at the same funding level, that I think we should, as a commission, really kind of drill down into some of these. And we might have to make some, like Commissioner Fry said, it may seem like a small number, and standing alone, it probably is. But when the whole, nickel and diamond yourself kind of idea comes to mind with that. And I think we need, as a commission, to sit down and really kind of decide some of these organizations that are included in the budget. We can tackle the discretionary stuff later if we so choose, and have that conversation, in the open meeting when we get ready to fund them or not. But I think we should really kind of take a look at every single one of those a little closer as commissioners together and decide how we're going to go forward. I mean, something's got to go. And if we're, like I kind of alluded to earlier, if we're, and I know there may be different pots of money in some cases, but if we're letting people go and not able to earn a living because of their position in the city, it doesn't sit well personally with me if we're giving money to other organizations just for the proverbial seat at the table and because we're trying to keep appearances up. And that's what it really boils down to in this day and age in 2020. So I think are just habitual expenses that we haven't really, as maybe taken it on and said, look, you know, we don't think this is valuable to us anymore. So.
Well, we've got the Boys and Girls Club that's a lot of families depending on the services that they provide. And, you know, we've been providing $25,000 a year that serves a multitude of families for childcare and so forth. So it's just, we've got a lot of things to consider with this kind of revenue cut.
And I would rather give them or try hard to avoid cutting their money if, you know, except as a last resort, and potentially just, you know, there might be some that we're like, look, we just don't have it this year because we can impact, you know, that money is kind of that proverbial ripple effect, especially now.
Right. Exactly.
More than ever, these families coming out of this are going to need a place for their kids when they're getting back to work.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if it's midsummer. You know, I'm not saying anything that you guys don't already know, but I think we really need to kind of zero in on that a little more this year than, at least than for me. I hadn't really as much in the past, and I think we need to really kind of pay us especially close attention this year on that.
I'll pull together a list and include it in a section of the budget, and then at some point, and show you what is included in the budget specific to those organizations. And then at some point in the future, the commission can schedule time to revisit those items unless you pull them outright from the budget with the approval.
I don't think anybody in the city of Aztec or any of these committee people aren't in the same position that we are. I think the whole county is. And everybody's looking at that. It's, we don't have an open checkbook, you know, to feed everybody, and we need to, what's the priorities? But I think Rosalind's absolutely right. We have to look at the priorities.
And let me just interject there real quick along those lines. I have had some conversations with Boys and Girls Club, the museum staff. So those conversations have started from my side as well, relaying that information. And, you know, everybody, to your point, understands where we're coming from so far, and knowing that it's going to be a different, potentially different look this year as far as funding.
So if we want to look at the cash reserves estimates, I know some of you, well, maybe nobody likes these numbers. Since I'm a numbers person, it makes a difference to me. So for general fund, we're projecting, now let me explain what I did on general fund. As far as the revenue projection for the rest of this year, I have made the assumption there's no revenues coming in for June. So whatever we get will increase this number. But it was just because I don't know what's going to happen with gross receipts. I don't know for certain what's going to come in on property taxes. I thought it was a more conservative way to just not try to include any estimates for June on it. Now on the expenditure side, it is again, yes, we're watching our spending and such, but there are still costs that we are incurring to continue to operate the city. And so again, kind of on the expenditure side, that worst case scenario of continuing to spend at maybe a February or March level, not necessarily at this very trim down level that we're at right now. So again, hopefully that's the worst case scenario. The transfer out, the 175 is for 140,000 going over to joint utility for the hub building, but also 35,000 is transferred over to corrections because the fees that we collect through the courts for corrections most often does not support 100% of the bill that we receive from the detention center. This bill for March was different in that our correction fees actually were greater than what our detention center bill was. So it's possible that that will continue for the May and April or May and June bill, and we won't have to transfer that much money over to corrections. But again, trying to take that worst case scenario when I was preparing the estimates for the general fund. Bottom line, my estimate is that we'll end the year with a $2.8 million cash reserve in general fund. With the revenue reductions, I'm projecting 5.6 million in revenues. And then we have about 8 million that's going out through expenditures and such. Now, that does include the discretionary fund. That does include everything we've talked about thus far. So again, hopefully that's the worst case scenario on the expenditure side, but that brings us down to an ending cash balance as of June 2021 to 668,000, which needs to increase significantly so that we have enough to start the next budget year with. You can see where we adopted the budget, there's a number at the bottom of FY20 that says FY20 adopted was 586,000. And that's when we adopted the budget last year, that's where we were projecting our cash reserves would be at the end of this year. And you can see we're 2.3 million greater than that, but we weren't having a year like we're expecting to have these next few months as far as gross receipts and such go. So I'm not comfortable that that number is going to increase significantly, and so we may need to do some more work on the general fund as far as expenditures, or like I said, we just do a more frequent in-depth review of what's happening in the general fund as we progress through this next fiscal year.
I have a question. Are you able to differentiate the gross receipts that come in from internet sales versus brick and mortar sales?
What we have right now, because of the House bill from 2 years ago, the state is continuing to do a distribution direct to the local public bodies based on population. So that will continue through August of 21, and right now it's $6,700 that comes to the city each month. In August of 21, that's the point at which then the state will switch over to what is actually being reported to each of the local public bodies. And that distribution will then reflect those actual internet sales, as opposed to some distribution they're doing right now.
So they're just doing, and I was actually having this conversation with somebody yesterday. I was mistaken. I thought that had already begun, but obviously I was wrong. So is that kind of something that's already kind of in stone, that we're going to get this payment no matter what kind of thing? But because I know personally, and I imagine I'm somewhat of a reflection of the average Aztec citizen, my online purchasing has gone through the roof, and we're going to get left out, and the state is going to have, I don't want to say a windfall, but comparatively, it's going to be a windfall, and they're not going to be obligated to give us that money retroactively either. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Right.
Oh, that's frustrating.
There,
Yeah.
Because I was actually thinking that might help kind of fill that gap a little bit, because folks are going to online, and now that we've got this in place, that would help to kind of fill the gaps a little bit, compared to the brick and mortar stuff that is all but evaporated.
right. There could be some that is coming to us. So when you go in and place your online order, and it asks you, are you inside which part, are you outside the city limits in San Juan County? When it asks you to confirm what your tax rate is, where you're located at, then most likely those sales are being reported direct to the city. It's not in that, it's.
I think I've had 1 or 2 transactions of all that I've done that have asked that, which I thought was kind of weird. I'm like,
Right.
that it was kind of down to that granular level. But most places, like Amazon and all the other major national retailers that I've ordered from, are not asking that. They're just charging, whatever state tax percentage,
Right. And that's the whole purpose behind when the House bill was enacted a year ago, was to allow both the state the opportunity to do the changes in their tax reporting programs, as well as allowing those online vendors to make the changes on their side, collecting that tax so that they could report it to the appropriate entities. And what that was a 2-year period that was allowed to get that implemented.
Now, do you feel like that? And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead. It looked like you were going to say something else. I don't know if it's worth the effort. And I'm kind of talking more to Steve on this one, to reach out to, before we go into that special session in June. I don't know if there's any ends to this, if it would be worth at least bringing up to Senator Neville and Mr. Bandy and Representative Bandy about, maybe they could at least bring that up and say, look, can there be maybe a little bit of an adjustment percentage wise, assuming that their internet sales receipts are increasing, that they could also maybe incrementally increase that to each municipality as a little bit of a stopgap under these circumstances. Other circumstances, I'd be like, good luck, and it might still be that thing because they're hurting for money too. But I don't know if it'd be worth at least making that phone call or an email to our reps and asking them to bring that up. I mean, I know Senator Neville is in charge of the Senate Budget Committee, isn't he? Well, he's not in charge, I think.
He's on it, yeah, for sure. And yes, certainly worth the conversation. But I think the one point that Kathy brought up is that the time frame was to allow the state to develop the guidelines or formulas to make the appropriate distributions. But
yeah, and I'm just saying, maybe just whatever the percentage, say, if internet sales have gone up 5% statewide, maybe they could adjust that allocation. I don't know. I don't think it would hurt to at least, maybe an email or a phone conversation. It'll probably go nowhere, but I think it's worth having.
Well, the Municipal League has brought this up at nearly every conference and every meeting that I've gone to. And they were working on a situation of fairness for the municipalities to receive the funds that, that their people are purchasing online. So I don't know what they're doing about that, but there was some effort to try to make it more fair. So hopefully that's still going on.
And I think that's where we are now, where that 2-year period is, right, Kathy? And that effort has gotten us to where we are now. I'm just, kind of shooting in the dark, hoping that maybe, I don't know if other people have thought of it and brought it up. I don't know, but maybe they haven't.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's probably worth the question. I don't know how the state would be tracking that. If they're not,
Right.
their system isn't prepared yet to capture all that information. Because of course they're going to be looking at it, the online sales may have increased, but the retail sales, the brick and mortar sales have gone down. And so they'll be looking at trying to balance numbers as well. But it's worth the conversation probably, so.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm gonna let my dogs out, but I can still hear everybody.
Okay. The next sheet in that cash reserve estimates goes into the special funds. So we have the road fund, the municipal road fund, that's funded through gas tax revenues as well as a portion of the gross receipts tax. This fund I've been allowing to build the cash reserve for the arterial in the event that we needed to have additional funds for the project. At this point, not knowing how this special session is going to go, I don't know where we are going to be with the arterial project. So there were a couple of projects in that the Streets Department and General Fund were trying to figure out a way to get completed, and that includes doing some type of road surface to McWilliams Road, as well as Mesa Road repave. So what I've done is I've included those projects over in the road fund. So because there was no way to get those done out of the general fund. We also have, in 2015, we received funding from the state for the monsoon cleanup. In 2015, we have about $67,000 left of that appropriation. And so again, a couple of items related to storm drainage that we haven't been able to get done, which are some culvert replacements on the Blanco Arroyo. So again, using that $67,000 over in the general fund, as well as then using some of this road fund money to complete those Arroyo or those culvert replacements to help with the storm water. But that still will leave, that's a pretty healthy balance. It's a $1.5 million that we would be able to contribute to the arterial project if we get some traction on it this next year. But if we don't, that money's just sitting there, and we have a lot of needs for road projects around the city. So again, over the next couple of years, just looking at how all of these projects move forward, but we may want to start tapping into that to get some of the potholes and sidewalks and all of that type of stuff to start getting some work done on those, because we haven't done any regular maintenance work on the roads for quite a while. And we need to get back into that regular program. Law Enforcement Protection Fund, this is just funds that come in for the police department, very specific to the police department and how it can be expended. The expectation is whatever comes in goes out, that we don't hold on to it. And so that's what you see. There's no cash reserve that should be held on to it. Sometimes we have a timing problem, and when we're actually able to accomplish the purchases, but the goal is to spend 100% of those funds each month or each year. The Local Government Correction Fund, this is specific to the detention center, the fees that are collected for corrections, and then the cost for the defendants, the prisoners being held at the county detention center. And this, like I had said before, typically the revenues, the fees that are collected for corrections are not sufficient to pay for the monthly detention center bill, and so it requires a transfer from the general fund to support it. The Economic Development Fund, this is very specific to those projects defined through LEDA and such. We made a transfer several years ago from general fund over to this fund so that there would be a pot of money available to commission if projects came about. The most recent one that the commission has approved is the one for the preschool on Main Street. We're waiting to see, so a portion of these funds have been earmarked, but so the money is available for if projects come forward to the commission. The impact fee fund, we have impact fees for the parks, and that's all based on new development. There hasn't been a lot of activity to increase those revenues. Intergovernmental grant fund, this is for those grants and those costs that are from the state, from the feds. So what's included in here for FY21 is funding for the senior center, for the library, the planning grant that we received for community development. Those are the very specific projects that are included in this fund. So again, the money that we spend is offset by the grant fund specific to those projects. Lodgers tax, like I said, we're expecting a significant reduction in the revenues coming in. We do have a pretty good cash reserve, so we're going to continue to market in a similar manner that we have been all along and make sure that we have funding available in the event that we're able to have any events, maybe in the spring. I don't know that we'll have any events this fall, but possibly in the spring, maybe we'll be able to start having some type of community events again. This can, again, this is going out 3 years without a significant change in the revenues. So hopefully we'll be able to maintain that level with the marketing of the city. State Fire Fund is a little different, similar to Law Enforcement Protection Fund. This is very specific to the fire department. The difference is that unless the legislature decides to sweep a whole lot of this money, we can usually allow these funds to accumulate from year to year. We don't have to expend 100% of it because we can accumulate it then to purchase fire trucks and different types of fire apparatus, which is very expensive. And so that's why you see this cash reserve continuing to grow, is because we have several pieces of equipment that will need to be replaced in the next 3 to 5 years that will spend down all of this money. The airport fund, we have one project that will be coming up in this next year, which is the runway 826 pavement rehabilitation. That will be 100% federally funded. I anticipate that bid opens on June 1st. So we'll be bringing that bid award as well as the grant application to the feds, to the commission on June 9th. And once it goes through, I anticipate we'll probably be issuing a notice to proceed on that in July for that project. Let's see. Capital projects. I think we'll be able to hold on to the North Main money because we already have obligated a portion of it already. I think, no promises. So we're proceeding as if we're gonna hold on to all of that. So that's the one project that is budgeted in the capital projects fund, as well as then the park improvements. And we can, you know, as we go through this next month and a half, we can define what those park improvements, what projects those actually include and such. I've identified 150,000 specific to park improvement projects. Cdbg, we don't have any projects. We haven't submitted an application for Cdbg because at this time, the community doesn't qualify unless we do neighborhood surveys and such. So we haven't identified a project yet. Then the next group are the enterprise funds that for the most part are in fairly good shape. Joint utility, again, it's showing a positive ending balance for FY 21, 22 and 23 have negative balances, but a lot will depend on how we actually progress with several of the capital projects. One of the big ones, and it wasn't our project, but it is the second substation. We've moved that out a couple of years because it looks like, in talking to Ken, and I don't know if he's on this evening or not, it looks like that project's going to get pushed out a little bit because everybody's not ready for it to get started. So I've moved that out in the budget. And then you have a list of the capital items that I have within the joint utility fund. It's a pretty ambitious capital program for this current year. I don't know that we'll succeed in getting it all completed, and we can talk about that a little bit later. The R&R funds, electric, water, and wastewater, healthy balances. The water rights fund is healthy. We used to do a transfer every year from the joint utility fund over to the water rights fund so that we had a reserve in the event that we had an opportunity to purchase water rights. We haven't purchased water rights for several years now, so I stopped that transfer because there's $500,000, almost $500,000 sitting in that fund specific to water right purchases. So until we get to a point that we start utilizing those funds again, I don't think that there's a need to continue to transfer funds into that fund. If anyone disagrees, please say or email or say something so that nothing? Okay. Irrigation assessment. This is on the Old Town area, and we've got a pretty good balance in this one as well. But this is one that we used to collect the fees through the county. They're no longer doing that through property tax, so we need to begin billing it ourselves from the city side, but we've got to determine what that rate structure and such looks like and identify what the projects are. It's hard to justify billing something when we're not spending the funds. And so we need to get together as staff and determine what that's going to look like. Then the last one is the solid waste fund. We're in pretty good shape with the rate increases that we did in March. That also included the addition of an administrative fee to cover those costs that we incur beyond the contractual costs with waste management. And this one we'll just have to monitor what that cash balance as we move forward to determine what rate increases may be necessary to customers based on the contract. But right now we're in a very good place with the solid waste fund. Okay. Any questions on any of that? Okay. So then on the second email I sent you, there's just a whole lot of stuff there, and it's only intended to be highlights, and it's not intended to be a complete list at this time. You will get much more detail and a much more complete and refined information in the budget book. What I did you have one that's referred to as revenue reductions, and what I tried to do was go through by fund and then by either department or within those funds, what some of the major reductions were in the revenues. We've talked about it by percentages and such, but that's what I tried to do here. It doesn't represent all of the changes in revenues. Again, I just tried to pick the those that seem to be most significant for the and such. But basically, we don't have any fund or any department that's not being impacted by the reduction in the revenues. It's kind of across the board, and we'll have to see. Some of it's very minor. It may just be a few $100s, but when you were only bringing in $1,000, a few $100s is as big of a reduction as $1 million to the gross receipts tax. So, but this is just intended to identify the significant ones. Do you have any questions about any of those or any other of the revenue streams?
In terms of the, the number of 30% decrease in revenue, is this sort of what the other municipalities think they're facing? Or did you just stick with looking at it Aztec? Do you discuss that with other entities?
Not so much. What I have, there's several seminars. There's been a lot of information coming out regarding how to approach the budgets under this pandemic and such. And a lot of the guidance, and I think it depends on what your community is dependent on. And while we do have tourism in our community, it isn't necessarily a large percentage of our gross receipts revenue. And so in talking, and this is more to nationwide on the professional level, the rule of thumb, if you weren't a tourist community, was to take what your revenue reduction was with the 2008 recession and double that. And so that's what I use. That 30% has come from. Now, other communities that are more tourist dependent, maybe using a higher percentage, just simply because it may be more difficult for those communities to come back because they've got large events that are being canceled and such this year, which will have huge impacts across their revenue streams and such. I don't know. I don't have anything, and you talk to people, nobody has any basis for what it's going to look. And so I'm hoping that the 30% is an ultra conservative percentage to apply to this, but until we see what happens, I mean, we know that the June and July distribution, which represents the April and May revenues, we know that that's going to be a very ugly number. But as we're able to start opening and such, then it's going to depend on how those businesses, where they're at what, can retailers open with 25% of their customers being able to come into a store at any point in time? And can the restaurants open when you have to have X amount of space, or tripling the space that you typically have had on your indoor dining and such? And so that's the unknown, is because we don't know how quickly businesses are going to be able to come back.
Right. Yeah, it's a whole new world. And I think in terms of tourism, are people going to fly to Europe anymore? Or are they going to stay in here and go to the Grand Canyon, or, go hiking on the Alien Trail? The people are going to be making different decisions, and it's difficult to predict what the future is going to bring.
Right. Yeah, I know my Europe trip is canceled. I'm thinking more road trip.
There you go. Yeah. I would just like to go see the grandkids.
I know that,
Yeah, our priorities have switched.
Yeah.
after seeing these numbers, Kathy, I'm not quite as worried as I was, because I was listening to what was going on in Santa Fe. They're looking at $100 million shortfall. And these numbers, trust me, my heart started beating a lot harder when I heard that. So I'm not totally disgusted with these numbers. I'm glad you're there, frankly.
Well, I looked at Santa Fe's numbers just out of curiosity, and if we could just even have one of their lowest months of gross receipts tax, we would be thrilled. We wouldn't know what to do with it. But of course, Santa Fe is a high tourist town, and the impact that this is going to have to them through the spring I would not want to be trying to figure out what that looks like for their budget. That would be very difficult.
Yeah, the balloon fiesta, they're trying to determine if that's going to even happen. My goodness, that's a multi-million-dollar game in Albuquerque.
Right.
So.
Yeah, well, and the state fair is the same way for Albuquerque.
Right.
And all of those impacts, all of those events, every event, it doesn't matter what size the event is, every event that gets canceled in the state means a reduction in taxes that are flowing into the state general fund as well. And so
Right.
I know that, that's creating some apprehension on their side in conjunction, of course, then with what's happening with the oil and gas revenues.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's strange times.
Yeah, definitely challenging. So the next sheet you have, and I titled it expenses. It doesn't have a header on it though. Again, similar to the revenues, and this is just highlights. And I need to finalize numbers because I was quite literally still working on numbers as of about 4:55 and decided I really needed to button it up getting something to you all. So, but this again, primarily the highlights of changes that have occurred within the funds, and then again by department. It doesn't list everything, and it's definitely not a complete list at this time. It will become more finalized by tomorrow. But in just about every department, you're going to see personnel. Every department that has personnel, there's going to be some type of change to the personnel costs, even with employees being budgeted to starting July 1st, just with it changes in the work comp insurance. You'll see that filtering throughout here, or potential increases in costs due to the unemployment. You'll just see all types of changes through here. Some, with few exceptions, I think I only have one on here right now that actually had an increase, and that was in the commission budget. But that was because of election costs. We always budget every year, even though it's not a normal election year. We typically budget in the event that there might be a special election called. And because of the way the election has changed and the cost that we're incurring, I needed to do an increase in the budget on that side specific to the election. This last election was about $15,000 was our cost for it, compared to the $4,000 that we had historically been paying for it. And so needed to get that cost included just in case, like I said, a special election would be called during the fiscal year. Let's see. Other things, like I said, capital was cut, so that for this year, that primarily impacted the police department and the parks department. Just a lot of changes. in it. And not by any means that this is the end of the reductions and such. We may need to go through and continue to refine this so that we can get that cash reserve for the end of the fiscal year to a number that will help us get in to start FY22 in a better place.
Kathy, I just want to say, because I've been saying it every year, I think that procurement position, you're still going to have a hard time filling that with, as compared to who was there before. It's going to be very hard. Good luck, but I hope it gets filled in January 2021 or sometime, but it's just, one of those things.
Yeah, I just live those numbers is the problem. I don't think there's, and I ran out of time. Like I said, I was continuing to work on this until about 4:55. So the numbers over on the joint utility side are not complete, not by any means, because there's also impacts over there with travel and fuel and personnel and such that will be further reflected on here. But maybe what we want to do is look at what I call that unusual or capital items, because you may have, if you have direction specific on some of these, because they are unusual type of items, either that, and when I say unusual, they're just not things that we do every year, or they're specific types of capital projects and such. So one of the things, again, because I am a little nervous about general fund. Well, no, I'm not a little nervous. I can be a lot nervous about general fund. I only have carved out a very small contingency in general fund. It's only $12,000, but we haven't had a contingency at all this year, and it's been challenging. When we've had some unusual things come up that we needed to change. And so we've been having to go through individual line items to try to cover some of these items. And so some type of contingency would be appreciated within the general fund. But this is an item that certainly could be cut out of the budget, because like I said, we went this year without it, and we managed to figure out how to make it work. So that would be 12,000 that could come back into that cash balance. In MVD, again, high traffic, high public traffic, a lot of movement in that building. The building, and I didn't go back to look, but 2006, 2007 is when we moved into that building. That carpet is 15 years old. And it really does need to be replaced. It is something that maybe we could along for another year, but the estimate that Jeff has provided was $12,000 for the flooring replacement. In information technology, poor Wallace, and he's sitting right there in front of some of you guys.
No, he's disappeared.
We complain to Wallace all the time about how slow our network connections are, and it's become really apparent to all of us since we've had to go into this virtual environment and such. So what is required to improve that situation for us is to replace all of our switches in the system, and he's estimating $84,000 to replace those switches. I guess as long as, and that's, if we're all okay with how our connections are going right now, but I know that some of our departments have had pretty significant issues with their connections and streaming and that type of thing, that this is an improvement in our technology that we think is important, especially if we think that this virtual environment is going to continue for a while. That connectivity is very important for us to be able to continue to conduct
Yeah, you kind of stole the thought out of my head. I think we need to be, even if, we can get away with it right now, I think we need to be planning for this to be kind of stalled over top of our head for a while. And if any kind of upgrades that we can make, I think need to be a priority, because this might become more of the norm than we want to admit. So yeah, I think that those types of things, if at all possible, need to stay in there. That's just my thoughts.
Okay. And
I agree.
we had talked about this morning, and I'll reach out to the county, is because this is directly tied to connectivity and has become of paramount importance because of this situation, because of the pandemic, is to see if maybe this is something we could submit under the FEMA funding. So I will check into that to see if there's a potential to have an offset in those costs as well. I had talked earlier about the culvert replacements on the Blanco Arroyo. There's 2 of them. One of them is here at Ash and at the concrete culvert here. The other one is up on North Rio Grande. These are estimated to be about $75,000 a piece for that replacement. So again, it's using the $67,000 in the monsoon funds that we had received a few years ago. This is the balance that hadn't been expended, and then the rest of it would be funded through the municipal road fund over in that other fund. And then that would be 2 items that we can check off on improvements for the Blanco Arroyo. The library, if I don't know if you recall, we're going to replace the sidewalk, the concrete area in front of motor vehicle that has a lot of scaling and such. We have a similar situation at the library. It's not as bad as what we have at motor vehicle, but the proposal is to go ahead and replace that area of sidewalk or concrete area at the library, and it would be done in a similar type of treatment that we're planning on doing over at the motor vehicle. Again, it doesn't, I don't know that it is at the same level as far as maintenance and potentially a safety hazard for the public as what we have at MVD, but it is those things that we've been talking about for a while that we probably need to address at some point. So similar to the contingency, possibly the flooring at MVD, this isn't something that has to happen this year, but it's one of those maintenance items that at some point we do need to do something with that concrete over there. The senior center, I don't know if Cindy is on, but or Jeff, but they can attest to the fact that she has serious issues with the HVAC system in her part of over that office area at the senior center. And so this number is probably too high. I can probably cut it by about 5,000, but this would be to replace the HVAC unit on that portion of the senior center. And it's been a maintenance issue for general services for several years. And it's something that does need to be replaced. And then again, because we have no history with this type of situation, I had gone ahead and put 20,000 in the budget just specific to continuing needs to buy PPE, masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, disinfectant, and that type of thing. That's over and above what our normal custodial or our normal purchases would be. And this would be something that we would continue to submit for FEMA reimbursement. But I just don't know. And partly, if we have a repeat this winter of the virus, we know that we'll have to increase those supplies and such for city staff.
I think that would be prudent. Yeah.
Okay. Items, or is there something? Again, on the road fund, I had talked about it earlier, 250,000 for McWilliams to do a chip seal. We actually have the design in progress. Clayton Harrison with CHC Engineering is going to work on a design for us, and then we will go out to bid for that project. And then Steve Morris had identified in his budget a need for repaving of Mesa Drive. So both of those, because there was no way I could get those out of general fund, so I've moved those over to the road fund. And then, again, like I talked about on that culvert replacement, the balance of one of the culverts to get both of those completed. On the airport, we've got the fuel tank has been in there for 5 years. And so we need to upgrade, we need to replace gauges and that type of stuff. So that's an additional 5,000 that isn't normal for that fund. And then the 160,000 for the runway rehabilitation. Again, that's 100% federally funded. The capital funds, as Commissioner Padilla had alluded to earlier, we've got 150,000 earmarked for capital park improvements. I have identified the items that Jeff had included in his budget as needs for the parks. While we can probably, probably bleachers at Hartman and Riverside, we can probably move out. The problem we have with the playground is that it doesn't, the surfacing of the playground doesn't meet the current safety standards. And so it does need to be replaced because it is a heavily used park with Mosaic Academy being right there. They utilize that area a lot for 9 months out of the year. So we do need to do something to make sure that that playground is safe for the children that are using it. Then on the enterprise and joint utility. So we have we set aside money from the disconnect, the red tags and connect fees that we charge on utility services. We set aside a portion of that money each year for what we refer to as a utility assistance program. And what that is for individuals that are having a difficult time paying their utility bill, and there's a criteria that they have to document what their specific circumstances are to qualify for the funding. And we typically fund that at $40,000 a year. We know that this is going to be an unusual year. And so at this point, we're thinking that we should increase this by at least 100%, double it to the 80,000, and possibly whatever might be left over from this year to go ahead and reappropriate it into next year as well, so that there's not ever going to be enough money for this type of thing, but at least we'll have a pretty good fund that as individuals come into the utility department asking, what resources might be available to them, that this will be one that we'll also be able to provide to our customers. Then within, the rest of this is capital within the joint utility fund. So in each of the utilities, we have a budget, a capital budget that is at the department head discretion to use based on projects, purchases that come up during the year. I think for the most part, Ken and Steve already have in their minds how they will use these funds, but we don't require them to specifically identify how they're going to use all of these dollars at the start of the budget year. We allow them the discretion to determine the needs of their departments. So within the electric department, there's 250,000 director discretion. In the water treatment and water distribution departments, we have 650,000. And in the wastewater treatment and collection, we have 500,000 that's available for it. In addition to those, the electric department is in the process of deploying the bridge meters. We're going to get, and I don't know if Ken's available, I think it's 500 meters we're planning on deploying by the end of June. And then another 1,000 meters in FY21. And then over the next couple of years, they've got about 3,000 meters that they're going to have to deploy. But it's a phased program. And so this is just the funding for the next phase of it. On the water distribution side, we awarded the contract for East Aztec that will be kicking off. Well, we've had the pre-construction meeting, and we'll issue the notice to proceed after we have a better feel about when the building will be delivered and pumps and that type of thing. But that we anticipate that to probably be completed by September. For the North Main Corridor, there's a water distribution system, so we've got 250,000 in it. For the East Aztec Arterial, if we're able to proceed with that project, 750,000 for a water line. And then for the New Mexico 173 Navajo Dam Road, the water line relocation, 250,000 for the design fees on that project. And we got capital funding for that project through the 2020 legislature. We're just going to have to see what this special session might do. We did get a questionnaire that asked if we would be willing to wait until next spring for that funding, and we responded yes. So I'm hoping that protects that funding. We did the same thing with the economic development money that we received. We said that yes, we were willing to defer the availability of those funds until next spring. So again, hoping that protects those funds. Then on the wastewater plant side, we also want to upgrade the UV disinfection system. It's highly labor intensive, but we haven't found a system that we're certain will work with our treatment process. So we're still researching that. But it's one of those things that the staff has requested for years to look at doing a more automated type of system. Right now, they have to pull each bulb individually and wipe it down, reinsert it, pull the next bulb and wipe it down. And they have to do that 2 or 3 times a week. So it's very labor intensive. So we're trying to find a more automated system, but because of our treatment process, we need to make sure whatever we put in there works with our treatment system. It's not worth spending $500,000 if you still have to pull each bulb and wipe them down. So, and then on the wastewater side, we have sewer on that one phase of the arterial coming out to 550, and we have sewer on the west side of 550. And we need to get those 2 pieces connected. And we thought that we were going to be able to bore, but we just don't know the unknowns of what type of rock is under there. We're not going to be able to bore. So this is probably going to become an open cut project. We're looking at the design on that. So that's what this 200,000 is for that project to be completed so we can connect those sewer lines. That's the highlights.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, pregnant pause there. Yeah, I mean, gosh. Just hearing this, just in this session is kind of over, you can imagine what it's like, trying to punched this together for us, which I appreciate. I appreciate that I understand this better and better each time we go through it. You know, I don't feel completely lost, although still pretty lost, you know, in the big scheme of things, but I appreciate it down the way you did. And it really kind of, you know, the highlights and things that, you know, help me personally to kind of see, you know, some of the the unusual expenditures and things that we don't have year in and year out. But I appreciate you together, even though I know there's a few more fine tuning stuff that you're going to have to do, and things are changing. It's very fluid, as you said at the very beginning of the workshop, but thank you for the briefing tonight, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, thank you. And we know we're not alone.
Yeah.
And that,
That's for sure.
the one thing sticking out to me, I just want to make sure, just for people listening, is it fairly common to have the director discretion on that much money? Like, so for Steve Morris, for example, because he's over water and wastewater, correct?
Correct.
That'd be over $1 million at his discretion. And that's a pretty common thing. I mean, just we don't know what's going to come up throughout the year, right?
When we went through the rate study and such, what was decided at that time was, rather than trying to identify specific projects each year, is that there would just be a lump sum appropriated to those departments then, and for the department head then to have the discretion in how to use those funds. So that's something that's come about over the last 5 years or so. If the commission is not comfortable with that, this is where you tell us what you would prefer to see, how you would prefer to have this handled. But this is what came out of that rate study.
Okay. I was just curious on, just kind of wanted that explanation out there, because, and that is, like you said, up to our discretion, because there's, you know, I have all the faith in Steve Morse, but there's been in the past some that, you know, I wouldn't have as much faith with. So I think it's good that, you know, we can see this, but again, just so we know, that's a lot of money that's just left up to discretion. But again, like you said in the past, it's hard to identify every single little thing that we want to do that might come up. So I understand the process. I just wanted to put it out there for anyone that might be listening.
Right. And the thing is, you know, there may be some items that this funding, some small items that this would go to, like under $60,000. But once we get over that $60,000 threshold, that's a formal process that would come to the commission for an award of a construction contract or design fees, or, you know, whatever that was, would come to the commission for the approval to proceed with that project. But again, at any point that the commission is uncomfortable with the process, or would like to have more input at an earlier stage in it, that's at your direction. And you just need to advise us how you want us to proceed with it.
But the way it's set up now, that still gives us that little bit of check and balance built in as well. It just is kind of a little bit later in the process. And like Austin, to his point, a lot of it's personnel driven, you know, at the time. And there might be a track record of maybe we had an issue in the past and we might want to pull that back a little tighter. But at the current time, if I understand what he's saying, right, and I think you do, is that, you know, we have the personnel in place to where we feel like their prioritization of projects is adequate. So we don't have to be as kind of micromanaging it, so to speak, as we might in another scenario, either in the past or maybe down the road from now. So I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth, but I think that's what he's saying.
Kathy said, you know, they can't just go out and spend $1 million without us knowing.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. You know, I'm not trying to run anybody off. I'm just gonna kind of go around and see if anybody has any last minute stuff, because I'm sure Kathy's had a pretty long day, and I'm gonna guess that she's probably not going home as soon as we turn this off. That's not my business, but I just wanted to kind of go around and see if there's anything else specific to this information that anybody wants to add or ask questions of either Kathy or of Steve. I don't have anything.
I don't either.
Just thank you for all that hard work. I just can't imagine that how overwhelming it must be, and we appreciate you, Kathy.
Thank you.
And I'll-
I'm glad you have a handle on all those figures, because I would be lost.
Well, you definitely have to like ones and zeros, that's for sure. So I think,
Okay.
I think we
Sorry.
have a workshop scheduled, a budget workshop scheduled before the next commission meeting.
Right.
And at this point in time, you've only been through, and we haven't even really been through it. You haven't seen the book yet or anything. There will be on the business agenda, there will be a budget approval item. But if you aren't ready to proceed with that, then we can pull it from the agenda through the business meeting and such. But we would just need to schedule then a special meeting, and we can go as late as June 1st for it. I have to submit, but I do have until midnight on June 1st to submit it. Well, I may not be here on June 2nd, but so if you need additional time to digest this, I don't want you to feel like you have to be ready to make a decision on an approval on Tuesday. We can schedule something subsequent to Tuesday to give you some time. So that's just something for you to think about over the weekend, I guess, so.
Okay, thank you for that info. And that's not final submission anyway.
Correct. This is the preliminary
Right.
due on June 1st. What we'll get is sometime between June 1st and July 1st, we'll get what is referred to as an interim approval from the state. And that will be the point at which we can actually establish the budget for departments. Then we'll have until July 31st for the commission to adopt a budget. And then that will be done by resolution. That will all be submitted to the state. And then the state has until September 1st to approve our final budget.
Okay, thank you very much. Last call for anybody, and then I'm going to turn it over to the city manager.
Nope.
Okay, hearing none. Thank you again, Kathy, for your work, and I look forward to seeing the book. But anyway, all right, Mr. Mueller, it's all yours, I guess. Anything else you'd like to add, sir?
No, sir, not at this point. I couldn't have said it better myself, Kathy. Good job. Appreciate the effort. And as she said, we'll have it on the next commission agenda next Tuesday. If anybody has any questions in between that time, I'll be available. Kathy will be available to fill in any gaps that there might be at this point.
All right, sir. With that said, hearing no other issues or questions, I'm going to go ahead and call it at 6:56. We're going to go ahead and wrap up this special budget workshop. So thank you, everybody, for your time. Again, thank you, Kathy, commissioners. I appreciate it. Department heads and anybody else that tuned in. Thank you for taking the time this evening. And with that, we will go ahead and close the meeting. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That crystal ball is still pretty cloudy.
But would still like to see that.
Yeah,